It kind of hits that same outcome feeling of like Catcher in the Rye, and I think I would describe Binks as like a less cringy Holden Caulfield. Yeah, that's a good way to describe him. Hello, welcome to Books and Booze. This is a series where I talk about books and I have some booze. Although I will not be having booze this go around as I'm going through Lent, so I'm going to have some apple juice instead. That's kind of been my treat for myself during this season. And I'll also be talking about Walker Percy's The Moviegoer this time around, which is probably a pretty good read for the Lent season. So cheers to Walker Percy. The Moviegoer is actually Walker Percy's debut novel. It was published in 1961, and it won the U.S. National Book Award that same year, so killer first book to put out. The novel's heavily influenced by existential themes of authors like Kierkegaard, which I'm pretty unfamiliar with, but I have a general idea about existential themes and ideas. And Percy read Kierkegaard just extensively, so I'm sure that's a layer to this that I'm kind of missing in my first read through. It's his most famous and like widely praised novel, and it kind of really established him as a writer in the forefront of definitely Southern literature, but I also think just American literature in general. The novel also draws heavily on themes from Dante, someone else that Percy read a lot of, and I did pick up on some of those allusions and themes, or just the way he's pulling from the Divine Comedy throughout this novel. And the book deals heavily with the theme of suffering, the theme of despair, and Percy certainly had his own experience with that as he was diagnosed with tuberculosis and fought that continually. And he also had multiple suicides in his family, all at different times, including his grandfather, his father, and his mother. So he was no stranger to the reality of suffering, as well as exploring that theme throughout his writings. The Moviegoer specifically is about a guy named Jax, who's typically called Binks throughout the course of the novel. Jack Binks Bowling. He's a young stockbroker who lives just a bit outside of New Orleans in a post-Korean War era, something we don't really talk about a lot in United States history. And he's watching the decline of kind of the traditional southern United States. He comes from a southern aristocratic family, and so he's seeing all kinds of problems happen there. And he's also grappling with traumatic experiences he had from the Korean War, and they've left him feeling alienated in his own life. And he just kind of meanders in daydreams constantly, and he has trouble in developing genuine, lasting relationships. And he's often finding more meaning or something higher to reach for by going to the movies. That's kind of what cuts into his routine life as he goes on this thing he calls the search, which is a big part of the book. And one of the other central tensions and issues that he gets into is kind of a tumultuous relationship with his cousin Kate, who is highly depressed, very sporadic, kind of unhinged, I think would be the best word to describe her. So if those themes are already kind of interesting you, I would highly recommend this because it's excellent, and we're going to just go ahead and get into that. If there are any qualms I have with this at all, it would be something in the way that I think at times it can kind of emotionally misfire in a way. The moviegoer, I think, is more focused on ideas. I think that was kind of Percy's objective with this book. But it's still a character study, so you're still trying to get some kind of emotional connection to Binks, to the relationships that he's attempting to develop. And at times, I don't know if I'm supposed to feel a certain way or if it's attempting to make me feel a certain way, but it would just kind of misfire, I would say, until the very last sections of the book. Those, I would say, actually land an emotional ending rather well. But the actual development, getting into his life, it's just not really there. And that also kind of spills over into I'm unsure how to feel about his relationship with Kate, his cousin. I don't know if it's just a disconnect that I have for the period of time, for that specific culture in this period of time. I know in the South we always kind of make jokes about marrying your cousin, but I don't know how exactly that would be viewed in a sort of 1950s New Orleans setting. No one seems to be too, blown away by it. So maybe it's more commonplace than I thought, but I wasn't sure if I was supposed to glean something else from that relationship developing. But there's a lot, and I do mean like a lot I really care for with this book, and then I really enjoyed. And one of the main things is just that central theme that I've already alluded to, that theme of the search. I think overall what the moviegoer does is it creates a compelling image and kind of motif of combating the constant disenchantment that we have around this spiritual malaise. It's a term that the narrator Binks uses a lot throughout the course of the novel, this malaise in our culture that he's trying to fight against. It still remains rather vague, though, in a sense, so it's kind of ambiguous about what exactly Binks is searching for, and he quickly addresses that, you might assume he's searching for God, but he kind of wants to be dismissive of that in a way. I get into a lot of this stuff with some of the video essays I do on the channel, but it's definitely kind of leaning into that fallout of Enlightenment philosophy going amok and us not knowing what to really do about it. I'll read real fast from kind of the famous, often quoted section where he describes the search. What is the nature of the search, you ask? Really, it is very simple. At least for a fellow like me, so simple that it's easily overlooked. The search is what anyone would undertake if he were not sunk in the everydayness of his own life. This morning, for example, I felt as if I had come to myself on a strange island. And what does such a castaway do? Why, he pokes around the neighborhood, and he doesn't miss a trick. To become aware of the possibility of the search is to be onto something. Not to be onto something is to be in despair. He goes on to explain how he believes that the movies are on to the search, that he is kind of overwhelmed by the mundaneness that life can bring, and that the movies, in a way, help him break this up. And it's interesting to see why Binks falls so hard into this. He sees the inklings of greater myth and spiritual power behind certain things, like movies and literature. He describes succumbing to the malaise as a type of death, and I would probably agree with that to a certain degree. So we understand that Binks, in that dynamic of seeing malaise as death, is searching for life, but I mean like capital L life. This is about a search for that life. That's what the movie-going is, and that's why Binks will even describe characters as being moviegoers, even though they don't really go to the movies. And even Binks doesn't really go to that movies over the course of the book. He goes to 3 or 4 that I can recall. And it's mainly just that idea that people have to actively combat this dangerous normality to a very industrialized, a very secularized, and disenchanted life. It becomes a death, which is why Binks and Kate only really see value in life when they actually get close to a literal death, which you get described through Binks's Korean War experience, and Kate explains it later on through a fatal car crash that almost killed her, but it did kill her first husband. And this book is just wonderful at building atmosphere. I don't know if I would necessarily say it's great at placing a setting, but Percy, I think, intentionally kind of mainly focused on atmosphere over setting. The atmosphere and the tone overpower any description rather than the actual setting speaking for itself. There's just poetic language and prose throughout here that is absolutely wonderful. It has a very nice pace to it. Kind of has a rhythm in a sense. And you yourself are kind of focused on succumbing to a certain sense of malaise as you read it, while you're kind of floating through this small tide pool of thought combating that dull, calm pace. And this causes you to focus on certain details and ponder over them. Here's just a quick example of some of the prose throughout the book that in a section that I really liked. This is just a description of Binks and his secretary that he's kind of taking on to this whimsical scripted journey in his mind, coming off a ferry around the Gulf Coast. We land near the fort, a decrepit brick silo left over from the Civil War and littered with 10 summers of yellow Kodak boxes and ticket stubs and bottle caps. It is the soul of dreariness, this historic site, washed by the thin brackish waters of Mississippi Sound. The debris of summers past piles up like archaeological strata. Last summer, I picked up a yellow scrap of newspaper and read of a Biloxi election in 1948, and in it I caught the smell of history far more pungently than from the metal marker telling of the French and Spanish 200 years ago and the Yankees 100 years ago. 1948. What a far off time. And I really like that this book is up in the Gulf Coast. It's an area that I have familiar with, mainly on the Alabama side, not so much Louisiana. Mississippi being kind of in between Alabama and Louisiana in my exploration of the region. It's a wildly underutilized setting for a lot of novels, and it's just like a weird place, weird melting pot of cultures. But through that kind of poetic prose language that builds atmosphere and this theme of the search, really the moviegoer is calling attention to the way our lives are being mediated through greater cultural systems that are out of our control. What is truly authentic and free versus what is scripted and confined or boxed in? You see Binks wrestling with this. He does this with the women around him. Sure, he uses them for casual sex in a way to get closer to subliminal experience, but that only happens because he's building this script in his mind that he can build around these encounters and kind of impose his own thoughts on them rather than them actually genuinely being that thing. It kills love and it replaces it with a lust for meaning, which ultimately makes it a meaningless encounter. And Kate sort of acts as this ultimate fall into despair for Binks. She's kind of, if he went further down that path, what could happen? In that sense, she's also a moviegoer. But then I really like that there's a dynamic built with Binks's brother, Lonnie, who you meet later on, who's confined in a wheelchair. And he's kind of the ultimate counter to Binks, the ultimate counter to this experience of searching. He's also a moviegoer, but he refuses the disenchantment almost at face value. He doesn't even entertain the idea of kind of wallowing in it. So there's just an expertly crafted juxtaposition across all these different characters, and it's just littered with that poetic language throughout the course of it. And I won't get into any spoiler territories outside of what happens, other than Kate and Binks becoming a thing over the course of the novel. But I just really enjoyed this read, and I think it's pretty timely. It seems like a lot of the discourse that I see, the conversations that I enter, are still around meaning making, cutting through this disenchanted post-secular world we're living in, and no one really knows what to do with it. And it's in the same way that Binks approaches it. He's unsure about what to do. He keeps it open. It's really fascinating that this was in the 1960s, and it just really hits the nail even now. Fascinating, not necessarily a good thing, but excellent, excellent book. So does it get the toast of excellence? Well, I just spoiled it for you there. Yes, it totally does. This is really a deeply layered book in more ways than I can kind of dive into in our usual video format. So my only thing is just go read it. You should. It's wonderful. I would suggest you read it if you're into these themes, existential themes, themes of meaning making, kind of trying to forge that greater myth. Not necessarily from ourselves, because you see that over the course of the book, and in real life it just doesn't really work that way. Or just struggle with the malaise described in this book. I think it's kind of an encouraging read in some ways. It kind of hits that same outcome feeling of like Catcher in the Rye, and I think I would describe Binks as like a less cringy Holden Caulfield. Yeah, that's a good way to describe him. But yeah, toast of excellence for the moviegoer, and cheers to Walker Percy, still hitting the nail on the head all these years, far after his time of writing this. So cheers. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you've read this, if you're interested in it, let me know what you thought about it or you're thinking about it in the comments below. I'd love to start a conversation down there. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps more people see it. If you didn't like it, let me know that too. Anything helps me out. If you like longer form book reviews like this, please consider subscribing, as I'm continuously trying to put more of these out. And also, if you like video essays around cultural products, mainly movies, please check out some of the video essays I've been making on this channel. They might be of interest to you, especially if you're interested in similar themes to The Moviegoer. Again, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you all in our next exploration.